Good morning. So this is the first video in a series of videos on everyday behavior intervention for parents. What we're talking about in this video is setting clear expectations for your child and how to do that. We often think about rules and we say, well, no hitting, no biting, no kicking, no pulling your sister's hair, no taking toys. Those are all rules that we tend to have, and rules are good to have. But how do you set clear expectations for your child? These are things that we want them to do. A lot of times when we think about expectations, we think about things like being respectful or being responsible. Those are good expectations, but those are broad categories. What exactly is respect? What exactly is responsible? And how do you teach those concepts? And if you think about the concept of respect, it's a broad concept. Being polite, it's a broad concept. If I were to ask you, what is respect? You would be able to tell me some broad things, but respect is things like saying please and thank you, or maybe that's polite. Polite is saying please and thank you. Respect is saying yes ma'am or yes sir, opening the door for someone else. Polite is using your fork and spoon at the table, depending on how old school you are, your elbows on the table, Respect is also putting down your cell phone when someone's talking to you or looking into the eyes of someone who's talking to you. We learn those things over time, but those broad concepts have to be actively taught as we go along. And the more explicit you are in teaching these concepts to your children, the more successful they will become, and the more success you will see. So rather than just teaching your children, let's be respectful, or before we go over to grandma's house, be respectful, state exactly what it is that you want them to do. And so this takes a little bit of time, and you may want to talk to any other caregivers that are helping to take care of your children, whether that's grandparents or partners or spouses. You may want to talk to them about what is it that we want our children to do, okay? And you're probably going to come up with a list of a bunch of things, and everybody's going to have an opinion. Pick your top one or two, okay? And focus on just 2 or 3 at a time. Because if you throw too much at your child or your children at once, they're not going to have that success, and then things are going to get lost and you're going to lose interest over time. But just focus on 1 or 2, maybe 2 or 3 things at a time. And think about the developmental age of your children. You may have one child that's 7, you may have one child that's 14, and you may have one that's 2. Well, your expectations may be different for each of those children. And so think about developmentally, what is it that you want your children to do, okay? So like I said, these are not rules. They're not what you don't want them to do. It's not no hitting or no biting. It's share your toys. That would be an expectation. You're stating what it is that you want your child to do. So I don't want you to rip the toy out of their hands. I don't want you to bite them. I want you to share your toys. Ask politely before you enter a room. So especially if you've got older kids, knock on a door, closing the door when you use the restroom, washing your hands. These are all great expectations. But if we say all of these at once, then our kids just get overwhelmed, and you're overwhelmed, and it's too much at once. Also think about your grocery store. And so in the grocery store, what are your expectations? Well, of course, you have a lot of rules, things you don't want them to do. No running, no taking things and putting it in the cart. But what is it that you want them to do? So older kids, you may want them to be pushing the cart the whole time. Younger kids, you may want them sitting inside the cart. Those middle-aged kids, you may want them holding the side of the cart or standing on the end of the cart. Another great thing is holding a lanyard. So get a good old lanyard for your keys, and then clip that lanyard onto the side of the cart, and they're supposed to hold the lanyard. That way they can walk freely, but they're never more than a foot away from the cart, okay? And so those are all good expectations. Then you want to introduce each expectation. So again, we're just focusing on a few at a time. 2 is a good number. Introduce them to your children. Say, this is the expectation for this week, okay? And so you may focus on an expectation of a week, Sunday night or Monday morning or Saturday. You may introduce that new expectation. Practice it with them. So practice what the expectation looks like. Practice is important. You don't put a football player, a pro football player, into the game and expect him just to have the skills. That football player practices, the basketball player practices, any athlete practices. Math facts, we don't just expect children to know their math facts, but we have them practice flashcards and multiple worksheets. The same with behavior. You have to practice that expectation, okay? So do a lot of practice with it. You model it. Show them how to do it. So you need to be doing what the expectation is as well. At first, you're going to have to remind your children, don't forget to do this. But then, as you continue to acknowledge, hey, I saw you do that. Great job knocking on the door. Great job sharing your toys. Great job holding onto the cart. Great job putting away your cell phone when I called your name. Whatever your expectation is, acknowledge it as soon as you see it. Tell them, I saw you. I acknowledge you. I recognize that you're practicing the expectation. The more you acknowledge, the less you'll have to remind that you need to do these things, okay? So don't forget to set up those expectations. I look forward to talking to you about how to use your attention a little bit more in practicing those expectations.